Okay, we're live. Everybody, Alexander, how you doing today? We
I'm
should
very
be
well.
live.
I'm very well. Reading lots of commentaries at the moment after this Supreme Court decision, which is completely well. We'll be talking about it, but I mean, it has had radical implications for the British Constitution and how it operates, which go, I think, far beyond the question of Brexit itself. But, you know, we'll be talking about all of that in our program. So the lawyers are having a field day at the moment. They're all analysing and discussing and talking about this. And I spoke yesterday to a partner in a big law firm. And of course, he was telling me that they would all be following it eagerly there. But we will talk about it all in more detail when our program gets going.
All right. So if you guys can see me, if you guys can hear me, if you guys can see Alexander, if you guys can hear Alexander, let us know in the live stream. Welcome to another Brexit live show. How's everyone doing out there? Alexander, let's see where people are joining us from very, very quickly, and then we'll get into the big news. We have a lot to discuss, a lot of shocking things to discuss. So let's see. We have Jonathan from Texas. How you doing, Jonathan? Hello from an expat in Texas. We have Jeff in Wisconsin, Nigel in London. Jonathan Printer said, gutted from London. There's a lot of people who are absolutely stunned. That's for sure. Streaky Bacon, we are sick in the UK. All right, let's see. North Yorkshire, Sir Quixote, La Mancha. How you doing? In Essex, UK. Sydney here, Secular Beast. How are you, Secular Beast? Let's see. I think I saw Ryan from Australia. Chat's moving fast now. Brisbane, Australia. How you doing, Ryan? Abergain from Netherlands. Debbie from England. Michael from Wales. Claire from buggered Britain. All right. Dieter Greta, how you doing? How's everyone doing out there today? Istanbul, Hastings, Chicago, Amsterdam. Shocked. A. Sanchez says, shocked. Yannis Tunakis, Kalispera, Kalispera Yanni. From Dublin, from Kent, from Cheshire, Denmark, Wisconsin, Yorkshire, Zurich, Liverpool. Where else? West Virginia, Suffolk, Florida. All over the world, Alexander, to hear what's going on in Brexit. Ian from Thailand. How you doing, Ian? From France, Netherlands. Joe from Belfast, Roving Roller from Wales, Hakam from Amsterdam, Indiana, USA, Valkyrie, how you guys doing in Indiana? From Belgrade, how you doing in Belgrade? Austria, Buffalo, New York, and London. And in London, we have the Oracle of London, Alexander Mercouris, ground zero of the Brexit Supreme Court case, London. UK. All right, well, Alexander, let me just read you the headline that I got via RT, actually, via notification on RT a few hours ago, which left me kind of shocked. PM Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament was unlawful. UK Supreme Court. Alexander, what does this decision say to you?
Well, first of all, I think we have to start by accepting the fact that whether or not we just agree with this decision, and I don't, by the way, I think that this is an extraordinary decision, but whether you agree with it or not, it is now the law. And I think this is something which we have to be very clear about. The Supreme Court has made a judgment. It is empowered to make these decisions. It has made a decision, and we have to accept that it is the law. Now, having said that, it is a law, it is a decision which radically changes our understanding of the way in which the constitutional system in Britain works. And I'm going to make a number of observations about the judgment itself. The judgment of Lady Hale, or the judgment of the Supreme Court, rather, which Lady Hale, who is its president, read out, and which I have sent to you. I've sent you the entire text of it. Firstly, it is extremely short. judgments of this kind are not supposed to be so short. Secondly, despite all the arguments and claims to the contrary, it is clearly political and it is clearly about Brexit. The whole point about the judgment is that it says that the decision to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it prevents Parliament debating Brexit. Now, that is a political judgment of a kind that English courts historically have never sought to make. The third thing about this judgment is that it barely cites any authorities. Now, this is a decision, as I said, of huge significance, but you will not find there, as you usually do in judgments of this kind, long lists of cases referred to, statements or comments of previous judges, previous judgments by the courts. There's no reference to judgments in other common law jurisdictions like those in Australia, in Canada, for example, where constitutional questions like this have arisen. There's no discussion of the eminent legal constitutional authorities that you would expect to see cited in a case like this kind, people like Maitland and Dicey. They're never mentioned here. There's only one very brief mention about a decision made in 1611 that the Queen is not above the law, which is true. But then it's important to say nobody up till today would have thought or would have said, legally speaking, that this decision to prorogue Parliament was contrary to the law. It's something that happens all the time. And there's also a quote from a British judge, Lord Bingham, which doesn't seem to be given in any kind of context. So we have a judgment, a very short judgment, unsupported to a very great extent by any legal authority, which makes a very, very clear political purpose. Now, that political purpose is clearly to make it as difficult as possible for Brexit to happen on the 31st of October. It's well known, and I'm going to say this straightforward, it's well known that judges, most of the judiciary in Britain are Remainers. But I have to say, I am personally still astonished that they've gone this far. And I'm going to say this also, frankly astonished that they are prepared to overturn what has been very well established principles of the British Constitution in order to make Brexit possible on the 31st of, or impossible rather, on the 31st of October. Now, I think they're going to be important legal and constitutional consequences for this decision. But before I actually discuss those, can I say that I am not sure yet what the political consequences of this are going to be? Boris Johnson has said that he disagrees with this judgment. Boris Johnson has said that he's not going to resign. It's not clear what the Remainers are going to do with the 5 or 6 days of parliamentary time that has been given to them. It's not obvious that they're going to move a vote of no confidence in the government, which would be the obvious thing for them to do. And it's not obvious that they have an alternative prime minister ready to hand. So, you know, it's often said that things are never quite as bad as they look at the beginning, or if you like, if you're a Remainer, quite as good as they look at the beginning. It may be that politically speaking, this decision may not have quite the momentous implications that its authors undoubtedly intended to do, but the legal consequences of it are huge. And as I said, it means that we are no longer in the same kind of constitutional situation in Britain that we thought we were, or which we were in just a few days ago.
Okay, Alexander, I'm trying to get to the live stream, to the chat, and see everybody's questions.
Yeah.
The first question that I have for you that I see people are asking is, are the judges, have they been, is this a case of elite capture? Have the judges been captured by globalists, by the Soros types, by, you know, these Remainer oligarchs, Brussels, because you did mention that the judges, it's no secret, the judges are at heart Remainers, and this is a political decision. Have they been captured?
Well, they've not been captured
elitists?
Because that is what they are.
You know what I mean.
Exactly.
You know what I mean in that sense.
The judges, the judiciary, are well known for being members of the establishment. Almost by definition, they are members of the establishment. Not all judges are prepared to put aside, as I said, the whole conception of the Constitution as it has been understood up till now, and as it was expressed only last week in a judgment of the English High Court given by the Lord Chief Justice, the Master of the Rolls, and the President of the Queen's Bench Division. But, you know, these judges, the Supreme Court judges, are. I have to point out that there is probably also another agenda here, which is that the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom is a very, very recent creation. And this decision that it has taken has enormously increased its own power. It means that it is now able to overturn advice given by the government to the Queen herself. So they have made themselves, in effect, a constitutional court, rather like the Supreme Court of the United States. And that may have been part of the agenda also. So yes, no doubt they are Remainers, but also no doubt they are intent on carving out as far as they can and as strongly as they can their own position at the heart of the British Constitution as its primary interpreters.
Okay, Boris Johnson is now in the US for the UN General Assembly meeting. Can he appeal?
No, there's no mechanism for appeal. There is no higher court than the British Supreme Court. That's why I said this is the law. He could, in theory, say. I mean, there are actually articles. I've read one in the Daily Telegraph which says, you know, he could say that, you know, the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction to hear this case at all, and therefore I'm to be going to ignore its decision because, as far as I'm concerned, it's unconstitutional. It invades or intrudes upon the prerogative of the Queen and of her First Minister, who is me, and therefore, if Parliament wants to reconvene tomorrow, or if some people want to attend the House of Commons tomorrow, that's fine. But I'm not going to the House of Commons tomorrow. The government is not going to the House of Commons. And any business that's transacted in the 5 or 6 days that Parliament is meeting before it's prorogued, because it will be prorogued in a few days. I'd like to come to that in a moment. It is not valid business. Now, there are articles. I read an article in the Daily Telegraph that actually argues for that. But Boris Johnson has again said, as he has consistently said throughout this crisis, that he will abide by this decision of the Supreme Court. So there's no appeal. He may disagree with it, but he says he's going to abide by it. So that's it. It's a done thing.
Okay, so this is now law.
This is now law.
What is the point of voting, Alexander? I see from the chat, Andrea, Will Woodfall. Why vote for MPs when the judges rule the country? What is the point of voting?
Well,
the Supreme Court, the judges have just given themselves, from what I understand, listening to you, reading various articles, the Supreme Court judges have just given themselves the ultimate power. Have they not?
Well, I think that he's putting it, I'm going to say, I mean, I think we shouldn't, you know, over dramatize. I think that's putting it too far. I mean, if there is an election, which there could be, and there is a government with a majority, which, you know, one would like to think there is, then, as I said, it is still empowered to enact laws, and the Supreme Court cannot go against laws that Parliament passes. So I don't think it's correct to say that the Supreme Court judges have taken all power into their hands. They have greatly extended the reach of their power into areas where traditionally in Britain, those powers never went. But as I said, I wouldn't say that voting has lost all importance or relevance. On the contrary, I would say that if you are a Leaver, assuming there is an election soon, it's even more important that you vote now than it was before, because it's quite clear that this Parliament is going to do everything it possibly can to obstruct Brexit, and any other attempt by the government to get round this Parliament is going to run into massive opposition from the civil service and from the judiciary. So I would say, on the contrary, this increases the importance of voting as the key democratic part of the Constitution, which is left.
Yeah, but why vote, Alexander, when you're always going to run into these situations?
Well, you can't. I mean, this is the point I'm trying to make. If Parliament, if there is a government with a majority in Parliament which is committed to leave, then there is nothing to stop it pursuing a leave. So the only situation, the reason we are in this deadlock position is because, as a result of that election that took place in June 2017, there is a hung Parliament. The government does not have a majority. Does not have a majority for its programme. That is its problem.
The part that I'm having trouble understanding is that, okay, the Parliament is supposed to enact the will of the people. The MPs have a constituency.
No, I mean,
mostly they're following through on the people, the area that they're in charge of, that they've been voted to represent.
Yes.
And they're supposed to act on that will.
Well,
they're not acting on that will.
Well,
they're not acting on that will. The judges are not acting on that will.
Yes.
Where does that leave the people?
Yes, you have to change the Parliament. That's the point I'm trying to make. But in order to change the Parliament, you have to vote. You can't say, voting is less important in this situation, because if you don't vote, you will be left with the Parliament that you have. And that is the reality. That is the political, legal reality at the moment. I mean, you have to change the Parliament. That's becoming increasingly clear now.
Can the Queen override this court decision?
No, the Queen, I've said this many times. No, I mean, you are not, well, in theory, yes, she can. I mean, she could, as I said, these are her judges. And I come back to what we discussed in our previous videos, which is why I personally was skeptical when we did our previous video that they would go this far. But they have. Well, they have. But I mean, the Queen remains the fount of justice. That's the constant. They were very careful. The judges were very careful to say, we're not going against the Queen. We are going against the advice the Prime Minister gave her. That advice, they say, was unlawful. Well, I know it's a fiction, but the point I'm trying to make is this: if the Queen were to issue a proclamation, that there is a device under our law which is called a royal proclamation, saying that this decision is wrong, that would be possible. I mean, you could actually override it. She is not going to do that. There is no conceivable circumstance in which Elizabeth II is going to change the habit of a lifetime and make that kind of enormously controversial political decision. One should not demand it or expect it of her. As I said, if you want to change the Parliament, you have to change. If you want to change the Parliament, the way to do it is through an election. Now, there are obstacles to holding an election because this Parliament refuses to dissolve itself. But I come back to what I'm saying. I'm not yet sure what the Remainers are going to do with the extra 5 or 6 days they have gained for themselves, because in political terms, that at this moment in time is all they've achieved. They've not yet explained what they need those days for.
Are we going to see a Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister?
Well, this is it, because of course this is the point. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is due to speak later today, and we're all waiting to see whether he's going to propose a vote of no confidence in the government tomorrow. If he does vote, he does propose a vote of no confidence of the government tomorrow. Will the other opposition parties and the 20 or so MPs who've broken away from the Conservative Party, will they support him in that? If they do not, and that vote of no confidence fails, Boris Johnson remains Prime Minister. If the vote of no confidence succeeds, then according to the Fixed Term Act, the Prime Minister in place, who is Boris Johnson, has 14 days, as I understand it, to try and recreate his majority. And if he doesn't, then the position goes to the opposition, who is Jeremy Corbyn. So there is a complicated process, a far too complicated process, if I may say. It's not a done thing that we're going to see Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. It is possible, but it is not certain.
Is Boris Johnson, because I'm trying to understand what's going on. It is so complicated.
Well, it is very complicated. Can I just explain why it is so complicated? The reason it is so complicated is because, and it's not just started with Brexit, it started even before Brexit, the British Constitution, as it has existed for centuries, has been steadily torn up. I mean, a couple of years ago, the Conservative and Liberal coalition government imposed on Parliament the so-called Fixed Term Parliament Act, which prevents the Prime Minister dissolving Parliament and calling an election when he considers it right. So in effect, that has taken away from the Prime Minister the option of dissolving Parliament. Now we've had this further decision. Well, then we had the decision of the Speaker, Speaker Bercow, going against all precedent, all parliamentary known rules of parliamentary procedure, of taking away from the government the right to control the parliamentary timetable and handing it over to the opposition. And now we've had this decision of the Supreme Court saying that the Prime Minister is not even entitled to prorogue Parliament if he wishes to, unless he has some lawful reason for doing so. No explanation, by the way, no real explanation of what is a lawful reason and what is an unlawful reason. I mean, so what we have seen is the Constitution being trashed as we have known it. I mean, and that is what is creating a political crisis and a very complicated situation in which no one has any very clear idea of how we go forward, because the rules are all being changed.
Can Boris Johnson take the UK out of the EU now, or is he absolutely prohibited at this point in time?
No, he's not absolutely prohibited at this point in time. I think this is another point to make. British law, Parliament has passed a law which said that Britain will leave the European Union on the 31st of October. The British Parliament has also passed another law which arguably contradicts the first, which says that Boris Johnson, if he doesn't get a deal done by, I think it's the 17th of October, he must ask the European Union for a 3-month extension. I have argued that Boris Johnson doesn't, a strong play by Boris Johnson would be to say, I'm not complying with that law. He, by contrast, has preferred to negotiate with the European Union and go for a deal. Now, if he gets a deal through, and that deal is passed by the House of Commons, Britain leaves the European Union on the 31st of October. If Boris Johnson disobeys the law, which he's sort of hinted he may do, Britain might also leave the European Union on the 31st of October. The only certain way of stopping Britain leaving the European Union on the 31st of October would be to change the government. Now, up to now, the Remainers have not been prepared to do that because they don't want Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister.
So it's Corbyn now that's the stumbling block.
Well, Corbyn
What
is
if they
the stumbling
figure out?
block.
What if they figure out a way around Corbyn, or
Well,
they say,
may
you know
do.
what,
They may do.
or
I mean,
or,
yeah.
or they say, you know what, we want the UK in the EU so bad, because obviously they do, that they'll just stomach a Corbyn prime ministership.
Yeah, I mean that remains an option. I mean that's not an option. I mean it remains a real possibility, but it would mean a major revolt within the Labour Party, and I think that might have problems for many people within the Labour Party. But you know they may be prepared.
Why a revolt in the Labour Party? Why?
Because he is its leader. If he says, "I am the leader of the Labour Party. I am the leader of the opposition. I should be, by rights, the person to form a caretaker government or a government," then, I mean, it would need other Labour MPs. It would need Labour MPs to either get him to change his position on this or to break away from him and, in effect, from the Labour Party in order to achieve that. Can I just say something? I mean, we've talked about the Supreme Court. We've talked about the Remainers. I do want to make a point, which is that Boris Johnson has not handled the situation well. I mean, and I've said this before, I mean, he's not played a strong card well. He could have, when he became Prime Minister, demanded a general election then. He'd have got it, and I think he would have won. Or he could have strung Parliament along until the 31st of October and then presented them with a fait accompli saying, I'm going for a no deal. And then it would have been very difficult for them to do. Or he could have prorogued Parliament right up until the 31st of October, come along to the Supreme Court, said to the Supreme Court, I don't accept your jurisdiction. This is what I'm doing. Go away. You are not, frankly, in any position to stop me doing what I want to do because I am the Queen's First Minister. He's not done any of these things. By contrast, Corbyn yesterday did pull wires at the Labour conference, and he did stop the Labour Party committing itself to Remain. You can be cynical about this, but he showed a degree of political skill which Boris Johnson up to this moment has not done. So when you say it's up to Corbyn, it is. But his concern, it seems to me, is not Brexit. It's becoming Prime Minister. That's what he's concerned about. So if he thinks going along with the Remainers is going to make him Prime Minister, well, maybe he will go along with the Remainers to make him Prime Minister, because if he becomes Prime Minister, then he is in a very strong position. And he has shown that he's ready to pull strings in a way that Boris Johnson up to now has not done.
Alexander, was this a setup?
Well,
I mean, was Boris either intentionally in on it? Was Boris played? Was it just very poor strategy on his part? Because it sounds to me that this was an out there scenario.
Yeah.
A very, low probability scenario that this would happen. And it happened. And it seemed that, all the roads kind of pushed, Boris into this outcome after he made some strategic mistakes. They pushed him to the Supreme Court decision. And to me, it just seems 11 judges all went against Boris Johnson, 11.
Yeah.
To me, that this was pretty much, the Supreme Court saying, okay, well, Boris fell for it. We got him here. Now we're going to overrule him, rule against him.
What Boris has done, and I think first of all, he's one of these people who, and his advisor Dominic Cummings, who think that they are cleverer than they actually are. And I think he's seriously underestimated both the intelligence and the resourcefulness and the ruthlessness, if you like, of his opponents, which is a very foolish thing to do. I mean, what he seems to have wanted, I mean, as I said, I never really understood the point of his proroguing Parliament in the way that he did, because it didn't prevent the Ben Letwin law. being passed. And on the contrary, it was made it more likely that it would be passed. He seemed to gamble that he would create a parliamentary crisis by proroguing Parliament, and then that would enable him to get an election, which he would fight on a Parliament versus people basis. But it seems to me that the more obvious way to have got an election would have been to simply ask for one as soon as he was elected Conservative leader and became Prime Minister. And he could have argued it and fought it then. That would have made more sense to me. So Boris Johnson has made serious political mistakes. But I have to say this, I think the Remainers are making political mistakes also, because what they are doing is they are, in order to prevent Brexit, which 52% of the British people voted for, trashing Britain's constitutional settlement. We've had, as I've said, changes to the rules of the House of Commons imposed upon it by the Speaker. We've had this extraordinary decision by the Supreme Court, which, as I said, has completely changed the boundaries in ways that would have been inconceivable just a short time ago. And we've had this act, the Ben-Letwin Act, which in effect tries to mandate for the government what it should do, contrary to the principle of the separation of powers. Now, is staying in the EU for a few more weeks or months or years so important that you're prepared to destabilize your entire country and upset the balance of your whole constitution? I wouldn't have thought so. But it shows you how fanatical, if you like, some people in Britain have become.
All right, Alexander from Torben, I believe that Boris and co will land a deal with Juncker. I want to ask you this question. Do you believe we're going to have Theresa May's dreaded deal back on the table?
I think
because that's the deal that Boris Johnson can get through. He can pass through with the EU.
I think that's
and with the MPs.
I think that's highly likely.
And part two of my question, before you answer that, I have a part two. Part two is, has all of this power now that is in the hands of the Supreme Court and that has gone to the MPs, it seems that we've seen a power shift of some sort.
We have.
You understand this better.
We've seen a major power shift. We've seen a major
Is this about getting Theresa May's deal through, keeping the UK in the EU in some shape or form, whether it's a customs union agreement or whether it's fully in, and kind of sealing it up really nice and tight to make sure that Nigel Farage and anybody else that tries to do this again and get the UK out of the EU will never, ever be able to do so? In other words, we've seen a huge power shift, power grab, and now it looks like they're just sealing everything up nice and tight.
Well, I think that is probably right. I'm sure that, all the indications are that Boris Johnson is heading towards trying to negotiate a deal with the EU, which will be essentially a reheated version of Theresa May's deal with a few knobs stuck on to make it look better, but which nobody really will conceive. And I think there's a fair chance, if that's what he puts before the House of Commons, that the House of Commons this time might accept it. But whether at the end of the day it can in fact prevent a future government with a majority in the House of Commons from going for a more radical form of Brexit, I still don't think that would be possible, actually. But that depends very much on what British voters decide to do. It's really, in the end, going to depend on them. I think it makes the case for people like Nigel Farage greater, not smaller. But that's my own view. I mean, there has been a power shift, but it's a power shift that's been done in very exceptional circumstances and which looks actually quite fragile to me.
Okay, before we get to the super chats, Alexander, guys, make sure to hit that like button. Spread the word about the Duran. Alexandra, doesn't the power shift worry you?
Oh,
doesn't
yes,
this
absolutely.
really, really worry you at the heart of it, outside of Brexit, outside of everything? What's happened today? Isn't it extremely unsettling?
Can I say something? It worries me much more than the question of Brexit. I mean, my worry all along has been that the persistent refusal, the obsessive, fanatical refusal to carry out the Brexit referendum outcome is polarizing and destabilizing the country, because people were promised something in a democratic vote, and that is not being delivered, and that is inevitably making people in Britain more and more angry. But now we're seeing something even further. We are now seeing the British Constitution being changed literally from day to day, without any proper thought as to its consequences, in order to to stop any a Brexit happening, because that's really the agenda, on the 31st of October. And we are moving steadily away from a proper system of constitutional government, because in Britain, we have no written constitution. We can't simply return back to what was there before. These changes that we have seen are now law, as I said right at the beginning of the programme, until Parliament itself says otherwise. So in a situation where the whole political and constitutional system is shifting, I wake up and worry, what kind of constitution, what's the next change going to be? And in the meantime, we have a situation where the power of the government to govern is gradually melting away.
Is the EU happy about what's going on, Alexander?
Well, I think they're delighted by what's going on. I mean, from their point of view, I mean, this is the absolute optimal outcome. People in a country vote to leave the EU, and what do they get? A political crisis. And not just a political crisis, a constitutional crisis.
We're both kind of speechless. I mean, really, it's unbelievable.
I don't think I'm exactly speechless, but I mean, I am very, very seriously worried. And I think anybody who cares about these things should be. I come back to what I said, by the way, an extraordinary judgment. I mean, a judgment that has made such a radical shift in what we all understood the law to be, and which is completely barren of authorities and citations. I mean, normally when you look at a British court judgment, an English court judgment, there's lists of cases and previous judgments and comments of judges extending in a constitutional law case all the way back to the 17th century that are quoted. People look at what was decided in other common law countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa. All these things happen. We look at the legal writers, people like Dicey. Nothing like that here. A very short judgment, hardly any legal reasoning in it. I mean, the kind of reasoning that you see in that judgment reads to me, I'm going to say bluntly, more like political reasoning than the kind of reasoning you would expect a court to do. And that is a very disturbing thing. Anybody who is concerned about having things, how the Constitution should work, should be extremely worried. And can I say, I'm not somebody who says that the British Constitution is perfect. By no means. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be changed. By no means. But if we change it, let's change it, knowing what we're doing, not, from day to day in this extraordinary manner because we don't like what Boris Johnson is doing.
All right. Finally, before we get to the super chats, Alexander, I'm thinking about the Brexit Party, UKIP, the two parties that were actively campaigning for Brexit.
Yeah.
What do they have to do? What does Farage do now?
Well, I think he has to mobilise. But you see here again, one of the things that I read a very interesting article by him in the Daily Telegraph, in which he was saying that one of his problems at the moment is that Boris Johnson and the Conservatives refuse to cooperate with him. And this is despite the fact that in Northern England, amongst the working class voters there, they are prepared to vote for the Brexit Party. They are not prepared to vote Conservative. So the risk is that the Conservatives will continue to run candidates in an election in these working class seats, which will simply take away votes that could be going to the Brexit Party, letting Labour still hold on, cling on in those places. So, but Nigel Farage needs to mobilise. From his point of view, we said that the EU is going to be very happy. From a political point of view, I want to repeat this over what I've been saying. If you believe in leave, if you want to see a clean break between Britain and the EU, Nigel Farage and his Brexit party are more important now than ever. Boris Johnson has made mistake after mistake in this crisis. And I don't get the impression, I've said this before, that he's really fighting this.
Farage will fight it.
Yeah, well, Farage will fight. I mean, he's shown that before, and I've no doubt that he still will.
All right, let's get to the super chats, Alexander. Yeah. We have a lot of questions for you.
I bet we do.
So let's begin. Phil Cooper, super chat, £5. Do you think the deep state in the UK is far bigger than we assumed? Doesn't it show the people how deep the establishment's influence goes?
Right. It's no deeper than I assumed. I mean, I've always known that what the establishment or the deep state in Britain was huge and very, very powerful. What I had not anticipated is that they would go to these extraordinary lengths to prevent Brexit happening on the 31st of October, or at least, a proper clean break Brexit. That is something I had never assumed they would do, because I thought that in their own interests, they would stand back and realize that if they did that, it would undermine the very constitutional settlement that is ultimately the basis of their power. So I have to say that is what I had not expected, that the deep state in Britain is very powerful indeed, or that the establishment in Britain is very powerful indeed. Of that, I have never had any illusions.
Okay, thank you, Phil, for that super chat. From Wayne Ashton, super chat. Hello, Alex. Does this mean if a future UK Prime Minister wants to prorogue Parliament, he and the reigning monarch must appear before the court to give the reason? That's the first question. Then the court says yes or no. That's the second question. And Alexander, I also saw in the live chat very quickly, some people were asking as to what the powers of the Queen are in general.
Yes.
With regard to Brexit in general when dealing with crises like this.
Yes, I mean, the question is an excellent one, because I think that is exactly what it means. I mean, I should preface that by saying that, of course, there would have to be a complaint by someone to say that the prorogation was unlawful. But if a future Prime Minister, for some reason or other, decides to prorogue Parliament, and Parliament is prorogued, has historically been prorogued in Britain for any number of reasons. I mean, this is not by any means an unusual prorogation. I've said this before, and I still insist upon this. This is prorogations have been done for political purposes in the past, and that's what was done here. But if somebody comes along and says, we don't agree with it, and the courts decide, well, there may be some force to that argument, then we could very easily find ourselves in a situation where the Prime Minister, in fact, we would find ourselves in a situation where the Prime Minister was asked to come along to the court and actually explain why he prorogued Parliament, and the court would sit in judgment over him. I mean, that is a radical departure from our law, from our constitution, as we have known about it up to now. I mean, if anybody had said 5 years ago or 1 year ago that Parliament, that the Supreme Court, that the courts might decide this, nobody would have believed it. I mean, this is a huge and extraordinary constitutional innovation. Now, as to what the Queen's powers are, the Queen's powers are vast. She is the head of the executive, so the Prime Minister is her first minister. He runs the government, and he's able to pass, or rather the government that he heads, is able to pass or carry out all kinds of executive functions, all the executive functions that a minister has, that ministers have, give orders to the civil service, give orders to the army, even declare war, by the way. All of those things, those are the powers of the Queen. The Queen also appoints the judges. She does so on the recommendation of her Prime Minister, because the Queen is the fount of justice and is herself the supreme judge. The judges merely act as her deputies when they sit in judgment. And the Queen is also the ultimate legislator, because all bills, before they become law, require her signature via the royal assent. And she has the power to refuse that. And that's actually specifically stated in the 1967 Royal Assent Act. She's able to refuse her assent to a bill. And of course, she also, by the way, has the power, I believe, still has the power, in theory, under a royal proclamation to declare law without actually going through Parliament. The only laws that she cannot pass in that form are laws that concern the raising of taxes. So the Queen has enormous powers, but in practice, she only exercises those powers in accordance with the advice of her ministers. That is the convention, and Elizabeth II is never going to break it.
Okay, super chat from Sparky. Any deal at all shouldn't even be entertained. No deal is the only way. UK would already be an economic juggernaut if they'd cut ties with the EU ASAP. Alexander, we did a video the other day that we will post tomorrow, which deals with this exact point in relation to Germany and the recession there and how the UK economy is doing.
Yes, I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's now, I think, increasingly become clear that the population, the people of Britain, are dividing along two lines. There are those who want a no-deal Brexit and will be satisfied with nothing less, and there are those who want no Brexit at all, and they will be satisfied with nothing less. Any kind of deal is not going to satisfy anybody very much, but the reality is that that is what we're going to get. And to answer the viewer's question, yes, I do believe that Britain has every potential to do well economically outside the EU. Alex and I have discussed it in videos many times. That has been my consistent opinion.
Okay, from Sparky Super Chat, Cameron is now for a second referendum, which gives the choice as Remain or Theresa May's deal. First referendum, he said, Remain or leave altogether.
Yeah. Well, this is in fact also, as I understand it, Jeremy Corbyn's position. What Jeremy Corbyn, I think, is proposing is that he's going to have a referendum in which he will propose whatever deal he negotiates with the EU, which will be essentially, again, Theresa May's deal with knobs on, and Remain as an alternative, and no deal as an alternative. So that's his idea. That's Cameron's idea. That seems to be everybody's idea, apart from those people who actually want Brexit, like Nigel Farage, who is saying that we need a no-deal Brexit. I would add that, of course, one of the points about having a referendum in that form, where you have a Brexit that says we want, it'll be a sort of Theresa May type, it offers an option between a Theresa May type Brexit and a no-deal Brexit. One of the purposes of it, I've no doubt at all, is to split the Brexit vote so that everybody who wants Remain votes Remain, and those who want Brexit are divided between two options, those who want the Theresa May type Brexit and those who want a no-deal Brexit. My own guess, by the way, is that if the government puts forward, if Jeremy Corbyn puts forward a Brexit plan, however bad it is, in a referendum and campaigns for it, it might win simply because for the moment, people are so exhausted by this whole process that they will vote for it as a means of bringing this whole issue to an end. But it will only be brought to an end in that case for a short time, because the only way, and this is the other point I've often made, the only way of ending this thing once and for all would be through a no-deal Brexit.
Okay, super chat from, what a hard name, Fee0ib0s1. Thank you for that super chat. Thank you for all the hard work. Cheers from Switzerland. Thank you for that super chat. From Sparky, a super chat, including the possibility of a deal with the EU is playing the globalists' game. Boris shouldn't play their game unless he's one of them.
Yes, well, of course, the trouble is that Boris has been playing that game. I mean, this is the point I've been making in both this video and previous ones. I mean, he could have taken the Churchillian line, which is, as I said, either as soon as he became leader, called a general election immediately. By the way, that's what I think Churchill would have done in that kind of scenario. I think he would have had the confidence to call a general election, campaign vigorously for it, and win it on the program of doing Brexit. Or the other thing Boris could have done is he could have said, well, you know, I see all these bills and things happening. I see the Supreme Court passing all these judgments. I'm not going to pay any attention. I'm going to just steam ahead towards a Brexit, which would be my sort of Brexit, on the 31st of October. And if you want to stop me, you have to remove me through a vote of no confidence. And in that case, I will come roaring back soon. That would have been his option. That would be the second option, but he hasn't done that either. What he's done instead is he has put up some sort of resistance to these ideas, created a parliamentary crisis by proroguing Parliament without, it seems, having any very clear understanding of how his opponents would respond to that. And he now looks adrift and seems to be moving steadily towards the only obvious route out for him now, which is to do a deal with the EU. So he's not turned out to be a very strong prime minister in this situation.
Do you think he's going to sit in New York and start laying the foundations for that deal?
Oh no, he's
there right now.
He's there like that right now, but he's returning to London tomorrow. Apparently.
He's returning tomorrow. Okay.
So he will come to the House of Commons and speak to the House of Commons and say whatever he intends.
Yeah, but some back channel kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, he could be doing all sorts of things, but as I said, I've repeated all along, he's not shown any sign of wanting to do them, and this has been a major problem.
All right. From Sparky, super chat, judicial capture, globalists own activist judges. Would you define these judges as activist judges or just politically captured?
This is judicial activism, take, you know, with steroids. I mean, as I said before, I mean, the idea that the Supreme Court would intrude into the advice the Prime Minister gives to the Queen would once have been thought of as unthinkable. I ought to say, by the way, I mean, this is the paradox, because, of course, Boris Johnson didn't actually give any advice at all to the Queen. What he would have said to the Queen is, I want to prorogue Parliament, and she would have agreed. I mean, there would not have been any discussion between the two of them, because that's not the way it's done. But in theory, now the Supreme Court says that we're able to actually judge these things. We're able to judge these kind of cases. That's judicial activism, as I said, with steroids.
Okay, super chat from Anair5855. It seems to me that the public's democratic exercise has been nullified What consequences do you see happening in a rapidly changing environment?
Well, this is the fundamental question, because of course, if Brexit doesn't happen, or if we get a Brexit which is so unsatisfactory that many people who voted for Brexit are not going to be satisfied with it because they won't construe it as any true Brexit at all, then the political crisis which we have had in Britain for 3 years now will be perpetuated indefinitely, because we're going to have more and more support for people like the Brexit Party growing, and we will have a ever more deeply polarized country. That is my overriding concern. We are becoming Ukraine. I mean, I remember the kind of, bitter divisions that happened in Ukraine in the run-up to the Maidan coup in 2014 and the subsequent civil war. And I'm seeing people talking and behaving in increasingly similar ways. And this business in Ukraine of, changing the constitution all the time, because I remember that happening in Ukraine also. I'm now starting to see it in Britain, and it worries me. It worries me a great deal. That's an understatement.
That's an understatement. Pretty drastic.
Yeah.
From Kurt, Super Chat. UK is treating the people and the referendum results similarly to the pre-revolution America. Is a real conflict the only prescription left to attain Brexit?
Well, I mean,
just kind of touched upon that.
This is exactly the point. I mean, where does this stop? I mean, at what point does this end? I mean, I said before, and I repeat again, voting now has become more important than ever. But let us assume that there is an election. Let us assume that a party with a big Brexit majority wins and takes control of the House of Commons. Are we going to what will the Remainers do then? Will they find other means to try to stop that government implementing its policy? Will they change the constitution in other novel ways? Will they say that bills, before they go to the monarch for the royal assent, have to be approved by the Supreme Court? I mean, that would be an even more radical change. Right. But we have no boundaries now, and that's the point I'm trying to make. We are living in a world, in a country where the constitutional boundaries are shifting so far that it's not clear where they lie any longer.
Yeah. All right. From Magnisia Shan, Super Chat. Thank you, Alexander. That's a super chat.
Yeah.
From John Dickinson, Super Chat. Keep it up. Thank you, John, for that super chat. From Sparky, Super Chat. Saw an old video of Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Charles watching TV together. And when Farage came on TV, Queen Elizabeth II commented, "He was unpleasant, a first impression." And to follow up on that Super Chat, Alexander, the video was around the time of the London Olympics, Sparky says. So the Queen does not, according to what Sparky has written to us, the Queen isn't exactly thrilled with Nigel Farage.
Well, I've heard the same. I mean, but you see, everything that everybody says about the Queen and her opinions is hearsay and rumor. Whatever she thinks about Nigel Farage and what she might slip out in a stray comment like that, she will not officially say. But once upon a time, it was fairly well known that the Queen was pro-EU. And for all I know, she still is. That was a long time ago that I heard that.
I imagine the whole royal family is pro.
I would imagine so. I would imagine so.
They're the definition of globalist elite.
Well, they're the definition of establishment, and we're talking about an establishment here. So I would not be surprised if those are her views. But I've not obviously talked about this with the Queen. Right. And if I ever did, by the way, which is inconceivable because I'm not in a position to speak with her, I would obviously keep anything she said confidential, which I'm sure all those people who did speak to her do. But as I said, she's not going to talk to me about this subject.
Okay, well, she'll have to deal with Farage when he becomes prime minister one of these days.
Well, indeed. But can I just say something? I mean, this is...
And he's getting close.
He's
Now with
getting.
this,
This
yeah.
is the point. You see, if Nigel Farage were ever to become prime minister, then the fact that Queen Elizabeth II has never obstructed any prime minister. I mean, would she then start to obstruct Farage? I don't believe so. I don't believe Elizabeth II would do that, even if she didn't like Farage. It's fairly well known that she and Margaret Thatcher didn't get on. There was, tensions between them, but she never did anything to stop Margaret Thatcher from doing any of the things she wanted to do. So, do bear that in mind.
Okay. From Patrick Cashman, super chat £2. No question. Thank you for that super chat, Patrick. From Sparky, scary if Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II doesn't like Farage. That's the super chat.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's particularly scary. I mean, as I said, the Queen has well understands that, there's her political person, her constitutional role, in which, as I said, she's essentially a cipher, and her private opinions, which she's been very, very careful to keep to herself. I wouldn't worry too much about that myself. I don't.
Okay, super chat from Sparky. Seems like purposeful bumbling on Boris's part.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've never been, I should say something about Boris Johnson. I've never been particularly impressed by him. I didn't think he was a terribly good mayor of London. And he's always seemed to me a rather disorganized person. And I have to say that's been my general view of him. And he was a terrible foreign minister. I mean, we ought to say that clearly. So, it could be that what we are seeing is just incompetence. On the other hand, I have to say that he never struck me as a very obvious leaver either. It is a well-known fact that before he decided to join the Leave campaign, he wrote himself two speeches, one supporting Remain and one supporting Leave. And David Cameron, in his memoirs, said that in the end, he only supported Leave because he thought that would be the quickest way to becoming prime minister.
Interesting. Super chat from Elaine. Would the Tories combine with the Brexit party if Cummings was out of the picture? He seems toxic.
Well, I have to say this. I think one of the great myths, one of the very destructive myths about British politics at the moment is that Dominic Cummings is some sort of malevolent genius who understands politics very well, and that it was his running of the Brexit referendum for Leave that actually won the Brexit referendum for Leave. I have never believed that. I don't believe that at all. I think Nigel Farage had a far bigger role in winning the Brexit referendum than Dominic Cummings and any of Dominic Cummings' clever ideas ever did. And to the extent that Dominic Cummings has been advising Boris Johnson and has created this mess that we are seeing, we have seen again that Dominic Cummings is not the political genius that he and many people think he is. Farage is a much, much more real politician than Dominic Cummings has ever been. And personally, I think Dominic Cummings does nothing good. That's my own personal view of this.
Okay, super chat from Sparky. Always keep in mind that globalists are in scorched earth mode and are willing to continue until the last person. Well, same problem in America and elsewhere.
Well, they are. I mean, I think this is exactly what we're seeing in Britain. As I said, we've seen parliamentary procedures changed. We've seen bills passed which breach the principle of the separation of powers. And we've now seen the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom intruding itself into the discussions between the Prime Minister and the monarch. I mean, this is scorched earth politics. I mean, make no mistake about it. That's what it is. I mean, it worries me. I mean, it worries me, as I said, more than any issue of Brexit does. I mean, how far are they going to go?
All the way. They'll burn the whole country down if they have to.
Well, it would seem so. But as I said, given that, we all live here, that's a very disturbing thought.
The globalist agenda, Alexander, is a religion.
Yeah.
And they will go all the way.
It is a religion is what it looks like. I mean, it has dare I say almost a cult quality at the moment because you can make a case that Britain is better off with the EU, that the disruptions of leaving are great and that too great, and that Britain has a bigger role a bigger role by being part of the EU than being outside it. But is this such an issue that you are prepared to destabilize your own country to achieve it? I mean, is the EU that important that you are prepared to tear up everything and destroy everything in order to, at least to destabilize your own country in order to keep Britain in the EU? Is it worth it? Is the EU worth it in the end? Well, it seems some people are so angry and are engaging in such a gigantic tantrum that they're prepared to tear everything down.
Awesome vlog super chat. If proroguing Parliament for 5 weeks is deemed unlawful, why doesn't he prorogue it again for 4 weeks?
Well, what's a very good question. Why indeed? I mean, can I just say something? I mean, unless there's a vote of no confidence tomorrow, which is entirely, as I said, in Jeremy Corbyn's hands, there is certain to be another prorogation because Boris Johnson still wants, apparently, to have a Queen's speech on the 5th, or I think it's on the 14th of October. So he's going to prorogue Parliament at some point in the next couple of days anyway. And it looks as if if you read this judgment carefully, the Supreme Court would be obliged to accept that was a lawful prorogation. I still reel at the concept of lawful as opposed to unlawful prorogation, but that is the logic of their own judgment now. So we're going to have a prorogation unless, as I said, there's a vote of no confidence, which we will just have to see how that works out.
Okay, super chat from Meganesia Shan. So true, Alexander. That's the super chat. Thank you for that. Super chat from Colin Foster. Get out of the EU before Deutsche Bank. Bail-in is needed.
Well, indeed. We've done a video on this, which is coming up very soon.
Yeah, Deutsche Bank is a whole nother
headache. Another big hard headache, yeah.
Yeah. Super chat from RC Repairs, Reviews and Helps. Hello, do you think we will leave the EU at the end of October? And if not, how do you think the British public will react, please?
I don't think we're going to leave. I think this is, I think after today, it's very difficult to see that.
You don't think we're going to leave it?
I don't think. I don't see Boris Johnson going against the Ben Letwin law. He may come up with a reheated version of Theresa May's deal. But you know what I think? If he does that, I think at the moment, my own guess is that the House of Commons will not pass it because from their point of view, from the point of view of the Remainers in the House of Commons, they will simply go on refusing to pass any law and kicking this whole issue of Brexit further and further down the line. That was what they were doing, if you remember, before the 29th of March. And it seems to me that seems to be the agenda again.
How will the people react is the second part of the question.
Well, I mean, very, very negatively. And we already see that Parliament is most unwilling to dissolve itself and face the people in an election. The question is, how long will that hold?
Super chat from Bernard Hutchinson. Can the government sack the Supreme Court?
Yes, is the short answer. It would need an act of Parliament to do it. But I mean, they can't just dismiss it. But I mean, if the Supreme Court was established by Act of Parliament, a majority government in the future could just abolish it. And I know there are some people who think it should.
Okay, super chat from David Pete, $5. Thank you, David, for that super chat. Super chat from Sparky. Maybe the US's evil plan to take over the UK and put Alexander Mercouris in as Vichy UK Prime Minister isn't so evil after all. It's better than the EU.
Well, there we go.
Sparky for that super chat. If only Alexander was Prime Minister, the UK would have been out of the EU.
I would not have made the mistakes that Boris Johnson has made. I mean, I have to say, when I saw this prorogation, I couldn't understand what its purpose was. I mean, it was for a very limited period of time, not 5 weeks, as I've said before. I mean, Parliament didn't meet for many of that, wouldn't have met for many of those weeks anyway. And the Supreme Court's claim that even when it's not in session, parliamentary business still takes place. It's true, but not the kind of parliamentary business that the Supreme Court was talking about. I mean, that is an absurd idea. So, I mean, it didn't make any sense, because it seemed just enough to provoke Boris Johnson's parliamentary opponents, but not enough to do what he was seeking to do. And since then, as I said, everything that he's touched has unraveled. And I couldn't see the point of that. If I'd been Boris Johnson, I'll tell you what I would have done. I'd have gone for an election as soon as I was elected to Tory leader. But, I'm not him. I'm never going to be him. That's not my... You
mean right away? The minute he was elected,
right away,
go into an election.
Absolutely. That's exactly what... I mean, he would have come along. Corbyn could not have refused at that point. I mean, that would have been inconceivable.
Before this whole circus started.
Well, the whole circus started. He would have come along, said, I want an election now. I want an election because I need a majority to deliver Brexit. We've seen that this House of Commons is not going to do that. And give me the majority and I will deliver Brexit. And it will be a proper, real Brexit. And I think he would have won.
Would you have aligned yourself with the Conservative Party, with the Brexit Party in that election?
I think that would have made complete sense. And again, if I'd been in Boris Johnson's position, right, that's yes is the answer. And I'm sure at that point, Farage would have agreed. But of course, he didn't do that. I mean, he went with this very overcomplicated strategy, which depended, as I said, on his opponents cooperating with him, which was a crazy thing to do. Can I repeat again? Jeremy Corbyn's duty is not to help Boris Johnson. That he's got no reason to do that, and he hasn't done so. And we shouldn't, criticise him because he's aiming to become Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn has never been committed on the subject of Brexit in one form or another.
Super chat from Andrew Halrand. No question. Thank you for that super chat. And another super chat from Andrew, this time with a question. Yeah. With the Supreme Court ruling on a political matter, do we now get the right to determine who represents us in the courts?
Yes, I know. I think this is now going to become a major issue. And I'm pretty sure we're going to see this. I mean, there's already been a host of articles. I think the first one was written by a Conservative commentator called Simon Heffer, before the Supreme Court made its decision. I think he wrote this over the weekend, in which he said, if the Supreme Court made the kind of decision that is made today, then it is behaving like the Supreme Court of the United States. It is taking a political stance. And in light of that, Supreme Court judges must be made accountable and must be selected through the same kind of process as Supreme Court judges are in the United States. In other words, they must be subjected to parliamentary scrutiny.
I see a lot of people on the live stream, Alexander, and even before, we got to the super chats, so we're talking about the Tilbrook case. Is there any update there?
No, there's been none. And can I just make a point here, which is, of course, there was a very, very interesting comment that somebody made on a thread in one of our earlier videos, which I have to say did strike me, which is that it was very interesting that the Tilbrook case goes nowhere. It doesn't even get past first base, despite the fact that, as I said, the submissions were drafted by senior QCs, and in my opinion, did make substantive points of law, whether you agree with them or not. Whereas Gina Miller's case, which to my mind was even more dubious, was much more dubious, goes all the way to the Supreme Court. So you see the contrast.
It was rigged. It was rigged.
No.
Boris fell right into that trap. He was either complicit, he was either incompetent, or I don't know what, but I think the roads were pushing him towards that.
I have to say, following Boris's career, I mean, he's not a stupid man, but I mean, he's certainly not a stupid man, but he's never, it seemed to me, risen above the caliber of a newspaper journalist. I don't think he's that bright.
Okay. From David Pete, Super Chat, the Queen supports the EU because she wants to be ruler of Europe? Question mark.
Well, I think people have been calling Angela Merkel the Queen of Europe.
Macron now.
Now Macron is the Emperor of Europe, if you're to listen to
Europe, yeah. From Sparky, Super Chat, globalist scorch earth strategy is what, 24/7 firing squads until the swamps on both sides of the pond are drained.
Well, there you go. I mean, can I just say, more and more people are going to come to that conviction. I think one should not underestimate how people feel outside London, outside the Westminster bubble. I mean, in places like Newcastle and Sheffield and wherever, outside London, people will be watching these events and they'll be getting more and more angry and more exasperated with a political process that isn't delivering what they voted for.
Super Chat from RC Repairs, Reviews and Help. Thank you for answering my question. Love your vids. Thank you for that Super Chat, RC Repairs. From Valley S, $20 Super Chat. Thank you, Valley S, for that Super Chat. We appreciate it. And the final Super Chat, Alexander, is from Bernard Hutchinson. Your thoughts on Greta Thunberg's unravel at the UN? Did you see the Trump walking in and her facial expressions and then her little speech?
I did. I have to say, I've been very concerned about this whole phenomenon of Greta Thunberg. I mean, I feel that she's being used and manipulated.
She's being used by Soros. Yes, exactly. I think that's come out and pretty well documented.
Exactly, and I find it frankly abusive of a very young person. And the fact that we're having this, she's now speaking in these frankly unbalanced terms, which has gone down very badly in some places. Especially in Germany, I understand, doesn't surprise me. I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think it's absolutely wrong to use such a young person in that way. And I also don't think, I mean, I've never felt that, I've always felt it was completely inappropriate to give her the time and attention that she was getting. I think that was wholly wrong. I mean, this issue of climate change and all that is, whatever views you have on it, it's a huge issue. It needs to be discussed very carefully. It needs to be discussed by scientists, by economists, by people in the business world, in politics. I think people have been putting and asking far too much of a girl of 16.
Yeah, and I think her speech at the UN was very disturbing because
very disturbing. Very.
I saw a young girl that's heading for a very, very dark outcome.
Well, absolutely. I was
to where she's been pushed into.
I was troubled about it, and I'm troubled for her. By the way, I mean,
and the people that cheer her on, and all the people on Twitter, and all these crazies that are cheering her on, they're pushing her towards a very bad ending.
I agree with that. I mean, I'm very concerned about it, and I would say I think it's frankly abusive, actually.
Yeah. I agree. All right. We have a couple more Super Chats, Alexander, that just came in. From Moon Dragon, do you think Britain needs an Augustus, one who knows that what he wants, take back the country for the people?
A Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus was a brilliant politician. He was one of the cleverest men ever to rule a country. If you want to read a brilliant account of Caesar Augustus, you should read a masterpiece of ancient history by the historian Ronald Syme called The Roman Revolution, which explains what a skillful politician he was. Caesar Augustus lived in another time, and he was essentially a dictator. He also executed lots and lots of people. What we need in Britain is someone with his level of political skill and intelligence, but we also need a situation where people start to behave responsibly and not create the kind of political crisis that we are seeing now, which created the situation which Caesar Augustus exploited to his own advantage all those thousands of years ago.
All right. And the final super chat from Meganesia Shan. Israel should put their tools down on a Sunday.
Well, I don't think, I'll give a carte blanche about this. I don't think Israel has much to do with Brexit, if this is the point that's been made. Most of the friends of Brexit, the really fervid Remainers in the Conservative Party, are friends of Israel, actually. And, one shouldn't introduce that element into something where I don't think it really applies.
And a lot of Free Julian Assange I'm reading in the
Well,
live
good for
stream,
them.
so
Yeah.
good for them.
Can I just say,
You have an update or any news
well,
on
indeed,
Julian?
I'm attending. Well, actually, there's been quite a lot on Assange. I mean, I presume a lot of people may have heard, but there was a decision by the court in Britain to keep him basically in indefinite detention when his sentence for jumping bail leaves until the extradition proceedings are concluded. And he didn't attend that.
Indefinite.
Pretty much indefinite. I mean, until the extradition proceedings are concluded. Now, he is locked up in Belmarsh prison. I understand he's kept in solitary. He has only sporadic attention with his lawyers, and his health is deteriorating badly. He attended that hearing, which affected his liberty, by video link. Now, in my opinion, and I'm going to say this very straightforwardly.
Can you explain that again, Alexander? He had a hearing in
Britain,
in London.
In London, there was a case. There was an actual.
And he wasn't well enough to attend it.
He wasn't well. Apparently not. He wasn't well enough to attend it, and a decision was made about his liberty there, which keeps him in indefinite detention even after the conclusion of his sentence for skipping bail until the extradition proceedings are concluded. Now, my own view about that is that a person who is too ill to attend court in that kind of situation, a decision on his liberty should not be taken. It should have been postponed until a proper medical examination was taken by an independent and impartial body. And if it was found that he is too ill to attend court, it seems to me by definition, he is too ill to be extradited to the United States to stand trial there, and the extradition proceedings should be dropped. There is, by the way, precedent for that. There was a case involving a young man called Laurie Love, who was found by the British court to be at serious risk of ill health if he was extradited to the United States. He was, by the way, not a blogger, he was a hacker. He hacked into the Pentagon systems, or was alleged to have hacked into the Pentagon systems, but they didn't extradite him because it was thought that he was too ill to stand trial in the United States. If Assange is too ill to attend hearings in Britain, then we need to find out whether he is too ill to be extradited to the United States. And it was a breach, in my opinion, of his rights that hearing, without him present, took place at all, given that his questions of his liberty were being decided there. There is an important event in London on Friday involving Assange. There's going to be a meeting, I believe, in Greenwich, and there's going to be another demo outside Belmarsh Prison. And I believe lastly, I should say, I gather Pamela Anderson has been saying more things about him, but I'm not up to speed on those.
Okay, very quickly, Alexander, if you have 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
This is connected actually to Boris Johnson. He has now supported Trump to renegotiate a new deal with Iran.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Very
well,
quickly.
I think this is
I think Germany as well. I think Germany and France have also come out and they've blamed Iran for
right. There's been, as I understand it, an announcement by the European countries saying that Iran was responsible for the attack on the Saudi oil installations. Now, I happen to think that Iran probably was responsible for the attack on the Saudi oil installations. I also think that countries should not be saying such things without a proper investigation, of which there has so far been no sign. But already we are seeing the Europeans, including Britain, are gradually lining up against behind the United States and against Iran, just as I predicted that they would. All this big talk from Europe about how they were not going to comply with US sanctions against Iran and were going to stand by the JCPOA has turned out to be so much hot air, as I always said it would. Iran will probably see this as more reason to align ever more closely with the two countries at its back, who are China and Russia.
It's very convenient that this attack happened, and it gives the leeway to the European Union to now also back out of the JCPOA without losing face, doesn't it?
Well, I suppose it does. To be honest, I think the Europeans have shown themselves so spineless in relation to this affair that, as I said, they were going to do it sooner or later anyway. And I think that was going to happen because, frankly, there isn't a strong leader amongst them.
All right, Sparky, we'll get to your last two super chats and we'll wrap it up. UK-US lack of writ of habeas corpus is shameful. That's the first super chat. Alexander?
This is presumably about Assange again. I mean, I should say, make it absolutely clear that I think Assange should not be in detention. I think he should be in hospital getting medical treatment. And I think the point about habeas corpus, I'm not sure about the legalities. I'm not an expert on habeas corpus, which is a complicated concept. But I definitely think she should not be in detention at this time, or at least certainly not in Belmarsh, which is a very high security prison.
And Assange extradition to the US after Epstein's death, ? From Sparky.
Well, I mean, I think he would be a great risk to his health if he was sent to the United States. I mean, we've seen that with Chelsea Manning. I mean, Chelsea Manning, I would remind people, is in indefinite detention in the United States.
Yeah, people don't talk about what they're doing to Chelsea Manning either.
They don't. But she's in indefinite detention in the United States and is being fined every day while she doesn't cooperate with a grand jury by giving evidence against Julian Assange. I have to say, I mean, I'm not an expert in this area of the law, but to me, that looks like a cruel and unusual punishment. That's my opinion.
We'll leave it there. Guys, hit that like button, smash that like button, share the channel with everybody you know, because YouTube does not like to share this channel within YouTube. So your help really helps out this channel a whole lot. Donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribe Star. That also helps keep this channel up and running. And when you purchase something from the Duran shop, like Alexander's shirt or my shirt or many more shirts and mugs, that also helps out this channel a whole lot. Alexander, any final thoughts as we wrap up this live stream?
Yes, I mean, as I said, the most important thing we must all wait for now is Jeremy Corbyn's speech this evening. He was due to speak tomorrow. He's brought his speech forward till today. The key point is he going to go for a vote of confidence tomorrow? Is he going to move to remove Boris Johnson as Prime Minister? It really depends on him. Jeremy Corbyn has never been in a position of greater power than he is now. If he doesn't go for that, if he doesn't act to remove Boris Johnson, or if he does, and he doesn't have enough support from the Remainers in the House of Commons, then all I can say is we will have changed the Constitution in radical ways to get 6 more days of parliamentary time. But if those 6 days are not used to any point or purpose, then Boris Johnson will come out of this less damaged than he appears now, and the prospects for a Brexit on the 31st of October will brighten. So, as I said, this game is not over. It's not done yet. But we need to watch and study very carefully what Jeremy Corbyn does, what he says tonight, and what he does tomorrow.
All right, so we'll end it on a semi-positive note then.
Semi-positive.
We'll all be watching Corbyn.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all in Corbyn's hands.
Yes, Corbyn has played his cards over the last few weeks, it must be said, with a certain amount of skill. But, let's not overestimate him either. I mean, he's not, if Boris Johnson is not Winston Churchill, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn isn't Clement Attlee. So, as I said, let's not overestimate events. But let's see what happens.
All right, guys. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for joining us on this live stream. Thank you for your super chats. Thank you to everybody who's donated to us, who has bought magic shirts or magic mugs. We appreciate all your help, and everyone, beautiful mug right there, and everyone who has hit that like button.
Always beside me, Alex.
Always beside you. That's right. And it is a beautiful mug. And everybody who has supported us and hit that like button and shared the video, that really, really helps us out. And we appreciate all your help and all your support.
Indeed. We live in interesting times in Britain, certainly.
Absolutely. Alexander Mercouris in London, the Oracle of London. Thank you very much for a fascinating live stream. Take care, everybody, wherever you are, anywhere in the world. We hope you have a good morning, afternoon, or evening. Bye-bye.